At the north edge of my home country, Rayesta, there is a veritable shelf of snowfall and wicked cliffs that mark our border with Phrygia. It is called the Hallifurian Mountain Range. And one clear morning, I found myself at a lodge near that border, looking at my map with the enticing X that I'd scrawled on it in black ink. Me and 3 of my friends had worked together to plot this X, yet none of them were willing to make the journey with me. So I was determined to check it out. With my essentials packed, I had left home and headed north, weighing my options. If I didn't want to take a 3-day detour into Langley-S, I would need to cross a respectable frozen flatland and then get over this mountain range, all to chase a shooting star. Hello everyone, welcome to the Crystalcast of Blackroot Archival, a visual recollection of antiques, artifacts, and curiosities that will fascinate and intrigue. I am your curator, Noah Blackroot, and today I'll be sharing the tale of the fallen meteorite. Now, I'm going to take you on quite a journey into one of my most unexpectedly adventurous trips. So if you like what you hear, consider giving my show a little love in return, or visiting Blackroot Archival in Seabridge for more adventurous tales. So allow me to go back a few days to set the stage. A few years ago, on a cold autumn night, I was out on my balcony doing some stargazing. I wanted to see the yearly sunflower meteor shower, and I was excited that year particularly because a few other hobbyists and I had purchased sharing scrolls so we could write messages to each other during the event. Sharing scrolls are expensive, mainly due to the components required. I'm not going to bore you with the exact enchantment process, but if you've never used one, it's like writing back and forth with a ghost on a scroll, but the ghost is actually someone else with another sharing scroll miles and miles away from you. All 4 of us loved this yearly meteor shower, so we wanted to make it feel more like an event, without having to share our thoughts over owls that would take a few days between us. And an event it certainly was. Most of the night went as expected. Some strays, bigger clusters of meteor trails here and there. My Phrygian friend reported some beautiful aurora that I couldn't catch at my latitude, but it sounded really, really nice. We were all watching the same general part of the sky, and at some point in the night, a rogue trail, bigger and more vibrant than anything I've ever seen, seemed to zoom right over my house. And I understand that these things are actually really high above me, but in the moment through my telescope, it just looked like I could reach out and touch it. My fantasies weren't too far off though, as it zoomed down to the north of me. I followed it frantically with my telescope so I could get the bearing, and I watched it light up the mountains to the north and burn out almost as suddenly as it appeared. I raced over to my scroll to write down what I saw, and within seconds the paper was lighting up with a word scrawled by all my friends, marveling over what we'd just witnessed. We all shared the measurements we took, and thank these stars we all thought to track its direction, we actually triangulated its probable location on a map. Well, square-ulated. But I digress. Between the 4 of us, we pinpointed almost exactly where the meteorite would have crashed down, and I absolutely had to go. I had no choice. I begged all 3 of them, but they all had reasons they just couldn't make the trek. We had done this work to locate it together. It just didn't seem fair for me to try to go claim it on my own, and also that sounded incredibly hard. The X was squarely in the Hallies, the Hallifurian Mountain Range, a region so cold and so harsh it was only regularly inhabited by various nomadic or isolationist tribespeople. But I set forth regardless, taking a ferry north up the Rayestan shoreline until I arrived at the Phrygian border where my journey would begin proper. There was a lodge here, a place for explorers and travelers to collect themselves before or after their expeditions, in which there were a few parties talking about the meteorite, and probably talking about going to look for it. I tried not to make it obvious that I was one of them, but there is no way someone as green as me could be stealthy about my intentions in hiking up into the mountains. Now, the amount of people seemingly ready to make this journey was a little disheartening, because the climbing parties there looked very capable. Nonetheless, the ones that were inevitably preparing in Phrygia and Langley-S as we spoke. If this fallen rock ended up being nebulite or umanolite, this could be an unprecedented payday for everyone involved, and everybody knew it. I got a few glances from the more experienced explorers, that "you're gonna die, kid" look, but I paid them no mind. I had my supplies, a full stomach, and faith in the map my friends and I had charted. I left the lodge early and started trekking out into the tundra. Just a few dozen yards out from the lodge, I spotted an old Phrygian woman dragging a sled. She looked like she just came out of the mountains herself, wearing heavy furs caked with frost, snow goggles, and a thick scarf. She approached me, she waved me down and told me to turn back. On her sled, there were 2 shivering climbers, apparently the 4th group that she'd rescued in 2 days. Way more idiots than normal, in her words. She was clearly at her wit's end. So, again, she told me to turn back. And I watched her drag the climbers to the lodge and dump them at the door. And it, I guess, dawned on me at that moment how naive I was to think I could ascend a snow-capped mountain range by myself. She passed by me again, heading back north into the mountains, and without even thinking, I pulled out my map and I showed her. She didn't really seem interested in anything I had to say, so I offered to pay her to be my guide, which seemed to at least slow her down. I suppose I showed my hand a little too much, and she knew I was after whatever all these same unprepared climbers were, but she took my map and compass and looked them over. "You got medical supplies?" she asked. Check. "Food?" Check. "Water?" Check. "Can you start a fire?" "Yeah, I could." "More clothes than that?" Now, don't think too little of me. I was already dressed pretty warm, but yes, I did have more clothes than that. "And a way to defend yourself?" Check. I must have passed her test because she agreed to guide me through the tundra and the mountain for a fee, and thankfully one I could afford, if I agreed to pull her sleds. Now, there's not really any way for me to fully put into words how difficult this type of path is to take unless you've taken it. Despite being wrapped up from head to toe, walking for nearly 12 hours through flat, wind-battered tundra is not easy, and it's not something some plucky determination and warm lodge soup is gonna defend me from. As we passed north through the Phrygian waste together, I must have just defaulted to talking her ear off, either to distract myself from the temperature or to make the miles pass faster, because she eventually turned around and politely asked me to be quiet for a bit because she didn't really like people. I asked for her name at the very least, and she just made a motion with her hand for me to shush. So, enough of that. I obliged, trying to focus on studying the environment to keep my mind occupied from that point. As we approached the base of the mountain range, she pointed up at a few peaks and described our next step. We would have to pass between Forlorn Peak and Resolute Peak to reach our goal. I'd been charting our path on a map, so the fact that we still had half of our journey ahead of us was definitely clear to me. The sun had almost set, so she and I made camp at the mountain's base. I had a slab of salt-cured meat in my pack that she subtly was eyeing like a vulture the second I unwrapped it. I knew I'd need food on my trip, but I probably over-prepared a bit. Though now that I had a helpful, albeit taciturn guide leading me, I was glad that I'd overstocked. Thankfully, after she had some food in her and hunkered down in the tent that we made, she was a little bit more social. While I was journaling, she looked over at me. "My name's Utrinska." That was not a name I'd heard before. I gave her my name right back, and she cut right to the chase to ask what it was that all these people seemed eager to risk their lives over. I told her about the meteorite and how my friends and I got the calculations to make our map. She scoffed at the thought and reached beneath the collar of her coat to pull out a colorful beaded necklace. It was a string of disparate objects with no prevailing color theory or organization. Gemstones, minerals, coins, teeth of various shades and shapes hung together on a simple leather cord. She had enough rocks, in her words. She wasn't going to throw her life away for another one. As a nomad, I thought perhaps she couldn't really empathize with so many people flocking to this meteorite, a demonstrable needle in a snow-covered haystack. But always eager to hear a story, I gave it a few compliments, though she didn't seem to share any sentiment. It was all just a bunch of junk in her eyes. A worn ruby bead that her tribe's quack doctor would wear, a busted-up pair of dice that drunken men would gamble with and argue over long into the night, whose symbols had long faded, a pearl from her niece's first dive that her sister would incessantly brag about before the lung disease got her, a tooth her brother carried for good luck on hunts, and he ended up some mountain cat's dinner. There were a few jade tokens, stone shards, metal coins that had once held monetary value to someone somewhere, but not anymore. I saw her mood start to dip, and her gaze settled on the far side of the tent as she just sat quietly and digested her food. Her eyes looked so heavy, but they stayed open. I apologized for asking and let the silence hang for a bit. Though I did have another question before she could drift too far into thought. If she didn't like people, why was she always saving them in the mountains? She didn't seem to reflect on it much and just shrugged. It's just something her tribe would do. They'd be disappointed in her if she didn't. So she stays out here in their lands on her own. She, quote, wears their stupid keepsakes to remind her of them and what they'd want her to do. What, did I think she just saved underprepared dopes every day because she wanted to? Well, yeah, I did. At least I hoped. And here's where my involvement in her business may have stepped over a line a little bit. I've never really been a person to let familial expectations define me or my decisions. Was she just going to resign to do whatever they'd expect of her? I couldn't help myself but to pull that thread. Would they just want her to die, sad and alone, doing something she hated? I knew it wasn't really my place, but I think she was wise enough to know that feeling hit me a little close to home for me to respond maturely. And when she did respond, she spoke a little more plainly. Life wasn't fun or hopeful for her anymore at this point. She woke up, she survived, she made camp, and the memories of her tribe were what she had. So that was her compass. She didn't really have any need for treasure or excitement. Still, it just seemed like a lot of pressure. So I made her an offer. When we found that meteorite, I would give her a piece for her necklace so she'd have a memory on there of something that she found rather than something that she lost. In return, she'd have to get me back to Rayesta in one piece. She just laughed, surprisingly, and turned over to go to sleep, reminding me that I had already paid her to get me back in one piece. But I thought this was a better deal. I wanted to keep picking her brain, but I couldn't bring my mind or body to follow through with anything but sleep. The day's journey caught up with me, and I slept through the cold night like a mountain bear. She woke me up at dawn to a clear sky and a warmer day than the previous one, albeit still requiring a coat. She was as quiet as she'd been this far, maybe steeling herself for the climb. Now, for your imaginations, please picture Utrinska and I ascending steep, impenetrable cliffs, hanging on by a pinky as crumbling rock walls give way. Imagine us frantically trying to find a stable hold with ice picks, gripping the tool with white knuckles. Because the last arc of this journey is actually the least exciting to go over. The pass between Resolute and Forlorn Peak was apparently the flattest in the entire range. Save for a few annoyingly stubborn thickets and expected uneven ground, it was hardly more difficult than the tundra. Thank the stars, I didn't have to deal with what I had just described to you. As we reached the promised space near our calculated X, I took out my compass and tried as best as I could to follow our measurements exactly. For the first time in the journey, I took the lead, using the tips of the peaks to navigate, but as I turned my attention back and forth between my compass, the map, the peak, compass, map, peak, Utrinska yanked the compass out of my hand and pointed. A few paces away, there was an overturned tree, roots torn up from the ground, almost stealthily covered in fresh snowfall, with its trunk bent down to the ground and scored with burnt markings. It took this scene to get Utrinska excited. She didn't know what nebulite was 12 hours ago, and now her excitement to add another rock to her collection had fully pupated. We crouched down around the fallen tree, suddenly hyper-conscious of the possibility that other people could catch us in the act of finding this thing. We brushed the snow out of the way with our gloves, and eventually my hand bumped against a hard chunk of rock resting just beneath the snow. Jet black, dotted with dark violet reflections twinkling beneath the surface, it was only about the size of my fist, dense and heavier than one would probably think. Despite our best efforts, we couldn't find any other chunks of debris nearby, but that did not matter. The elation I felt in that moment was practically unrivaled. So much of our world has been explored and charted, but the second that meteorite crashed down, it was like a countrywide treasure hunt, and we were the ones to find it. For thousands of years, our ancestors have been traveling, sailing, building, gradually developing the tools and techniques we have to navigate the world. And the feeling that you have a long line of people that paved the way for you and that you took their teachings and their techniques and did something tangible and measurable. I tread over to her and I hand her the stone, which she initially took as some kind of joke before deciding that no, I had merely gotten hypothermia and gone insane. She tried to protest and give it back, but at this size, I don't think I could really break it cleanly anyway. I didn't want it to just crumble and put a damper on this victorious moment. She needed another rock for her collection, and I was honored to be part of it. Besides, nothing that meteorite could buy me would be more exciting than this story, right? But as you may have gathered by now, Utrinska is leagues more stubborn than I am. She shoved her fist into my chest, clutching her necklace in her hand and pushing it against the front of my coat in a way that made it impossible to reject. "Take it, for your museum," she said, which I'm surprised she even remembered. She had thought about what I said the previous night about what her tribe would want her to do and what she was going to do with the rest of her life. She admitted that she'd probably keep patrolling for climbers to help, but the best place, at least for these old keepsakes to be, in her mind, wasn't around an old woman's neck, but somewhere where their customs and stories could be appreciated by other people. Though she sheepishly added that she might have to put a few old grudges to bed to give me a more positive version of her stories, which is much appreciated. Her tribe wasn't all bad. Her doctor made a mean stew apparently, but we'd have plenty of time on the trek back for that. So I stayed true to my word. Her bead chain now lives in Blackroot Archival, along with a meticulously researched exhibit about the Utstock tribe's history, supported beautifully by stories of her direct lived experience. Though I must come clean, I couldn't in good conscience perform this story for the masses with my friend out there clutching a ridiculously valuable stone, so I left her with half of my sharing scroll. So the minute she let me know she sold it, I knew I'd be in the clear to tell everybody. Utrinska of the Utstock tribe, congratulations on your new cottage. I'll be sure to visit soon. This has been Noah from Blackroot Archival. Thank you for watching, and stick around for more next week.